Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to our viewers around the world, and welcome to this our third discussion hosted by the University of Cape Town on how we can unleash the new global university. We are halfway through our 5-part series. We have discussed the future of academic conferences and international collaborations, and please do catch up on those you might have missed, and I hope you can join us for the ones still to come, such as the postgraduate international experience. This event focuses on undergraduate student mobility, and we are asking the question, can virtual experiences be a realistic substitute for now and for the future? We are asking about the now because the pandemic brought undergraduate student mobility to an almost complete halt right across the globe. Although international travel is very slowly starting to pick up again, most experts predict a significant chill on the sector for a long time. Of course, if you've been watching the series, you will know by now that we are not just concerned about the current disruption. International student mobility is increasingly valued by universities and some governments across the world. Many set ambitious targets for the numbers of students they want to have international experiences. The value is clear, a global mindset that opens up to new ways of thinking and being, engenders cultural sensitivity, and develops resilience to being in unfamiliar situations. As a result, until the pandemic, the number of students traveling abroad increased steadily over the last decade. The impact of this travel on the environment is seldomly explicitly addressed, but concerns are growing. UNESCO data from 2014 suggested that the greenhouse gas emissions generated by student mobility were equivalent to those of entire countries such as Croatia and Tunisia. Imagine what they must have been by end of the decade. These figures are quoted by Associate Director at the European Association for International Education, Laura Rambley, in the 100th issue of the journal entitled International Higher Education. And she makes an urgent call for institutions to find creative solutions to the problem. But the impact on the environment is not the only challenge around undergraduate student mobility. Student mobility must be one of the most elitist activities in which universities participate. Only about 2% of the world's student population can benefit from study abroad. Even within rich countries, there are wide racial and class imbalances, something organizations like Diversity Abroad, founded by one of our panelists, Andrew Gordon, were set up to counteract. We know that only a tiny percentage of UCT students are able to travel abroad. Barely any are able to go on paid semester study abroad programs. Even exchanges where tuition fees are waived on both sides are a challenge because of the imbalance in currency exchange rates between South Africa and most of our partners. We at UCT try to compensate through internationalization at home, whereby institutions aim to integrate a global dimension into their classrooms and campuses. I think it is worth noting that the financial model of many universities has come to rely on international mobility, including study abroad, short-term and full degree programs. So the halt of these universities has posed a huge challenge, not only to the global values of universities, but their very survival. We need to bear all of these factors in mind as we explore the virtual alternatives, which are a potential solution, at least to the challenges of sustainability and inequity. Our panelists will be able to speak to the terrific innovation and creativity in international online learning that they have either designed or experienced. We are asking the question, can the virtual experience provide all the advantages of physical travel, or at least the most valuable aspects? Can it deliver the equivalent of both studying and living abroad? Let us see what answers we can reach in the next hour or so. And perhaps not just answers, because we're not just looking for answers. Answers are important. But let's see what ideas come up that can help us grapple with the question and then come up with answers. Let me introduce our moderator for this event, my colleague, Professor Sue Harrison, who is a full professor of chemical engineering and currently a Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Internationalization here at UCT. And as Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Internationalization at UCT, student mobility falls within Sue's portfolio, and there is no better person to lead us through this conversation. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Hetty. So as Hetty has pointed out to us, we've got this conversation this evening where we're looking at the perspectives, the new perspectives, the cultural exposure, the diversity, the expertise that comes from being able to enjoy student mobility, with the negativities of inequality, of climate impact, of the challenge of being able to express oneself when you're in a cultural minority, and the current challenge of COVID-19. So as we look at this, our current constraint now, how is that going to help us to think further into the long term? We have 5 great panelists this evening to help take us through this discussion, and I'd like to introduce each of them. The first is Mokhadi Marishana. Mokhadi is a master's student in clinical psychology. She spent a piece of time at the University of Amsterdam in 2017 as part of her undergraduate degree, and received recognition from our partner university there as being a wonderful African ambassador. She is passionate about the arts, optimistic about human nature, and curious about better understandings of the challenges and power. Moving on from Mokhadi, Atankosi Nzala is a Mandela Rhodes Scholar, and he is the winner of the Vice Chancellor's Award at UCT in 2019. Now, the VC Award winner over the last couple of years has got to travel to the Worldwide University Network, AGM, which for Atankosi was to be in Mexico in May, and obviously was unable to do this. So he brings a specific perspective. Atankosi is enthusiastic about education and impacting lives. He already is contributing to owning businesses and plans to own many into the future to help other people tackle unemployment, poverty, and inequality. So you can see his focus on education, leadership, entrepreneurship, and community development. Our third panelist is Vinicius Camilo. Vinicius is from Brazil. He works in computational technology and is really interested in how far that can take us. He's been doing work on international projects, but has never traveled. So Vinicius has had experience through COIL. COIL is a collaborative online international learning, and it's a virtual exchange which was started by the State University of New York. And his experiences have taken him through China, the US, and now South Africa. And so his insights will be particularly interesting. Moving to our fourth panelist, this is Andrew Gordon. Andrew is a social entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of Diversity Abroad. Diversity Abroad was started in 2006, and its vision is that the next generation of young people from traditionally marginalized and underrepresented backgrounds be equipped with the skills and experiences that allow them to thrive in the 21st century interconnected world and global workforce. So Andrew is obviously an advocate for student success through equitable access to global education. And our final panelist is Ben Nelson. So Ben is holds a BS in economics from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's the founder and CEO of Minerva, which is fashioning university education in a new way to challenge us both academically, to expose students globally, to develop new skills in a different way. So his goal then is to nurture critical wisdom for the sake of the world, and to pioneer new forms of educational transformation in a virtual way. So we're very happy to have such a team with us, and how we're going to handle, how we're going to start our conversation is to pose a series of questions, and I'd very much like to pose the first question to Mahadi Marishana. So Mahadi, you visited the University of Amsterdam in 2017 as part of your undergraduate program in psychology, and you were recognized there as a wonderful African ambassador. Could you tell us what you gained from going to Amsterdam physically? What was really hard about being there? And did you gain anything from the challenges as well as the opportunities?
I personally gained sort of experiences of actually being immersed in sort of how life is there, particularly just the ways in which the society operates. Like, it was very interesting to sort of be in a society that prides itself so much on egalitarianism. Obviously, it does have its flaws, but in South Africa, in such a situation where every moment you are confronted by inequality, to see sort of a nation in which someone can ask a government minister to clean up his own mess in a building or something was really interesting to see on the ground in terms of how people actually move around each other. But also I found a great deal of like freedom and safety as a woman in Amsterdam that I've never experienced in my upbringing in South Africa. Just sort of from day one, you are taught how to sort of behave defensively, and to be able to take walks home at night and so forth was definitely quite an interesting experience. In terms of some of the difficulties I definitely faced, it sometimes was sort of being essentialized or assumptions being made about you in spaces where you haven't even had a moment to voice something for yourself. And so there were often assumptions made about where I was from just based on how I spoke, or the fact that the rest of my cohort at the time was predominantly white. So it was quite unexpected that I was there as an African student, particularly from South Africa, because sort of the face of South Africa was quite different from the actual demographics of South Africa when it came to our semester abroad cohort. And it was also just having to defend South Africa, but also finding out that there were ways in which South African exceptionalism was being carried out in those spaces, because people would say these sweeping negative statements about Africa, but then as soon as you brought up something in defense, but South Africa wasn't included in that idea of Africa. So it was very different to sort of see how people sort of internationally perceived South Africans and South Africa in general. And obviously, feeling very disconnected at some times from things happening back home, particularly because the situation on campus in the year that I was abroad was another round of fees must fall protests, during which my friends were experiencing some rather difficult times with some of the adjustments that the university had made to carry on the academic year. So it was definitely just like a very big learning experience for me in that sense, but I gained a lot from it, especially in terms of some of the academic freedom I also had to sort of take courses that were not offered at UCT, but also may have fallen off my sort of curriculum if I had even tried to take them in my usual degree.
Thanks very much, Mahadi. Great insights there, and interesting to see what the flip side would be if you hadn't travelled and had done that remotely. So we'll come back to that with time. I'd like to move on to Atunkosi and ask you, as the recipient of the Vice Chancellor's Award, you were intended to travel with the Vice Chancellor and me to Mexico to attend the annual general meeting of the Worldwide University Network. We'd worked hard towards it, and we'd started to look into getting your visa and doing your paperwork, and it was quite exciting. I was excited about going to Mexico too. It's a new one for me. And then at the last minute, the whole thing was cancelled because of the pandemic. So what do you think you lost by not having that travel experience? And yeah, what did you think you lost by that?
Thank you so much, Prof. Harrison, and good evening to everyone. Well, I would say the first thing that I lost was a promise that I made to my girlfriend that I'll buy her a prize or a gift in Mexico, which never really did happen. And that was kind of like a risk for my relationship. On a more serious note, I really do think that there are some connections that you can maintain virtually, but you need to start physically. So I feel like one of the things that I lost out on with regards to going to Mexico was my personal and professional development, where you are given really a platform to connect with people who are decision makers, people who are making impact, and a simple LinkedIn message that you would send to someone who would have been in that particular Mexico gathering is not sufficient if that physical interaction doesn't exist. So any opportunities that will link to that physical mobility that could still be sufficiently carried out virtually do not exist now, and it's very hard to actually start that off virtually if you never really did move physically to meet with those people or network with them. So that's the first thing. And I think the second one is I really connected with the topic, or rather the theme, which was around environmental well-being, climate change, of which I really did quite a lot of research and spoke a lot, researched about and made a lot of meetings with a lot of professors about, so that I can really have a concrete understanding of the theme, as well as what to really bring back to UCT, which is my home, once I actually get enough of data and interaction with other people or other stakeholders who would have been there in Mexico. So I really do think just those three things are things that I lost out on due to me not physically moving or being able to go to Mexico.
Thanks very much. Could I come in before we leave you and say, do you think there are mechanisms by which we can turn those without the travel? I'm putting you on the spot.
Not a problem. Look, I think it really does depend. As I mentioned, I think it's on the relationship level. Depending on which relationship level you're in, you really can start a relationship or network virtually. But there are some. There are some virtually created links or virtually created networks that can be sufficiently sustainable throughout telecommunications without having to have started physically interacting with people. But that will depend on the relationship level. But sometimes what you need to start off that virtual networking or that telecommunication with a person is that physical movement to actually go and meet with them. And I think if on that relationship level that you're in, if that physical mobility is missing, then it's really, really difficult to make those virtual networks work.
Thanks very much, Atinkosi. Let's move on to Vinicius. Vinicius, you've had several experiences with this collaborative online international learning program called COIL. Could you describe your experience to us briefly and tell us how has it changed your mindset compared to that which you would have if you'd simply interacted with your student body at home, the local students? And what do you think you would gain by physical travel? You mentioned specifically that you haven't traveled abroad. So what do you think you would gain by physical travel that you haven't yet experienced through the COIL program? Thanks, Vinicius.
Thanks for this project, and I feel flattered talking beside those people here today. I will describe briefly my COIL experiences. I have 3 COIL experiences so far. 2 of them was just conversation with students in the United States and in China. And one of them that I am right now is a research with students in South Africa. So I never had English classes. And before my first COIL project, I never thought that my English level was good enough to keep a conversation or something like that. So when the opportunity showed up, I just took it, and I realized that I was better than I thought, and I could make this conversation and create the first connection with someone outside my country. So that's the first thing that definitely breaks the language barrier inside my mind and allowed me to connect with someone outside my country. So the second project was with China, and it was 2 months ago. So it was really interesting because we could talk about the pandemic a little. It was the beginning here in Brazil and was the ending there. So we could talk about how they went through this, how does it feel like going back outside. So this second one was more about the subject instead of language. And then this third one, I am right now with South Africa. We are further language. We are doing a research about nuclear generation by country. So it's definitely more challenging. In our meetings, we need to discuss our jobs, figure out a way to put everything together. But at the same time that is more challenging, I also can see that it feels more complete to doing academic research, because we already have everything that we need. We have communication, we have our materials, we have sources, so we can do all the research fully completed by the online, which it's not happen when you are learning, you are getting to know someone, the culture or the person itself. So I guess this is the bad side of the online experiences. I'm a Brazilian guy. I like to touch. I like to look into people's eye, to hug, to kiss. So this is a big part of my getting to know someone, and I really miss this online. We not reach the time that we could make this through technology. Who knows the future? But that is the bad side of my point of view. But we can work on it, and it's definitely an introduction to travel physically. If I had to travel to South Africa now, I could be a lot more comfortable because I feel like I already know someone. I feel like I already know a little about the culture. So it's definitely an introduction. It's definitely an option for us to go. Thank you, Sue. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Vinicius. I'm going to move on to Andrew. Andrew, diversity abroad focuses on providing opportunities for the next generation from traditionally marginalized and underprivileged backgrounds. How do you see the virtual experience overcoming or enabling equitable access compared to our prior model of physical travel?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Sue, and thanks again for the invitation to speak. You know, I would say to start out first, focusing on the positives of virtual. I think as a colleague or Vinicius just mentioned, with opportunities like COIL or virtual internships, we're seeing students who in the past hadn't had access to global educational opportunities now having access to those opportunities. It is much more affordable in a lot of ways, having access to virtual exchange or virtual study abroad, internship abroad programs. And we're just getting started. So I think when you think of the rapid development of technology, where we could be 5-10 years from now from the standpoint of virtual exchange, virtual study abroad. So that's on the positive side. Where I think we have to be careful when we think of virtual as being some sort of panacea for equitable access to global education is to think a little bit about what are we missing when we are doing virtual exchange versus something that's in person. So I'm gonna focus on 3 different areas: immersion, building networks, and then interpersonal growth. So first is the immersive aspect of it. I think it was Magadi. She was talking about her experience, how it was like you're there, you're in the country, what you see, what you eat, all those little things that make the nuanced about your experience different in country A versus country B. You get that when you're abroad. You know, I always say in traveling is usually you talk to people, what's the things that get people very excited is usually talking about food and language. And the food part is where you can talk about it. That's very different than sitting down, breaking bread, having a meal with somebody and them telling you about the dish that is their favorite dish from their country. So there's a very real immersive aspect that helps connect us to cultures and people that we miss when we're in a virtual space, or it's just not the same when you're in a virtual space. The next one is building your networks. Akin Kosi talked a little about this as well. Yes, you can build a level of networks online, but that's different than being in class with somebody and saying, hey, let's go get a coffee afterwards and continue this discussion. Or depending on where you are in the world, let's go grab a glass of wine and talk a little bit more about XYZ. And so the networks that you build, the informal networks that we get from being in an immersive environment, we miss that. We miss that in the virtual space, whereas we would have that more so in a live face-to-face experience, immersive experience. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the interpersonal. You know, when we at Diversity Abroad talk about the benefits of global engagement, global education, we talk about the academic benefits, the career readiness benefits, but then also the interpersonal benefits, how we grow as individuals. And there are things about the face-to-face, the live experiences abroad that really push us as human beings. For one, we push our comfort zones. A lot of times we're in environments where we may not speak the language. We don't know the culture as well. We're using currency that we're not used to using, eating foods. We push our comfort zone, and that helps us develop as people in ways. And again, it's not that virtual exchange isn't uncomfortable at all, but it's just a very different experience than being in an immersive experience. Resilience. I think we probably see, or we've seen over the last few months with the thousands of students who were participating in global programs and had to come home because of COVID. That is a perfect example of having to be resilient. Life, you were expecting X, Y, Z, and something completely different happened. You had to pivot, you had to change and come into a new environment. And for those of us that have had the opportunity and the privilege of being able to travel, we know one of the constant things is that things rarely go exactly how we expect. And so being in those environments is part of what it pushes us and helps us to build resilience. And with that is also building in more confidence. And so again, we're talking about kind of the interpersonal benefits of global exchange and in-person exchange. It also helps us in building that confidence. And then the final thing I'll say is that it puts us in environments where we have to build that much more empathy. And I think particularly when we're coming from maybe a majority or coming from a privileged background, and then we're in an environment where we're the minority, or we might be the minority for the first time in our lives, and seeing what that feels like, or being in an environment where everyone is used to doing something a certain way and you're the one that's not, and how that helps us in building empathy. It helps our young people and students in building empathy. So those are just some of the areas to think about. The final thing I think I'll say with this, and it's not necessarily connected to, well, some ways connected to interpersonal growth. I would say particularly with marginalized populations that I think of the Black or the African American population in the US. And often when I'm talking with Black students about going abroad, one of the things I say is that it is great to go to another country where you may not be seen in a negative light that you might be seen at home or that you might be used to at home. And you can't replace that. You can't replace being able to get out of an environment that might be more stressful because of your identity, and going into an environment that it might be a little more welcoming to you at a certain point. So those are certain things that you can't replace. And so back to the foundational question, what do we have to be careful of? Is we have to be careful of thinking, again, that global education is a panacea, because what we don't want to do is say, great, now that we have virtual exchange, all the students that traditionally couldn't do in-person exchange, this is the alternative. And then what happens is you have like this two-tiered system. The students who have the money, who have the privilege, will continue to get on planes, go into different parts of the world, and grow in all the different ways that we've talked about. And those that don't have the funds, who don't have access to, will have virtual exchange as the only option available to them. So I think virtual exchange can be a very important tool, in widening perspectives and in building connections. But we shouldn't. It's not apples to apples. We can't think that virtual exchange can replace in-person exchange. It can be a supplement. It can be a complement, but it can't replace that. And if anything, I think as we're looking at virtual, we want to leverage that as a tool to help increase students' desire to want to engage globally, both at home as well as abroad.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Andrew. Great insights there as to the mutual benefit between the two. Moving on to Ben. So those of us who are involved in higher education increasingly recognize the value of some form of exposure to international ways of thinking and doing. And until now, we've looked at that either as physical travel or internationalization at home. The pandemic has made us explore whether the online experience can contribute to it. So what do you consider to be the most critical elements of the online approach? So it's a similar kind of question. Can you get the full experience and create the global mindset without physical immersion? And we ask this very much in terms of what you're trying to do through Minerva.
Yeah, well, I think much like many conversations around education, you have to look at the nuance, because oftentimes you talk about, well, can online be the same as offline? Can you do, as you asked, the full experience? But if you were to think about what the world was like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that conversation would be odd because there was no concept of the offline experience. Because that was the only set of experiences we knew. And we knew that the set of experiences that somebody could get aren't the same, right? So if you are out, for example, when I was an undergraduate many years ago, I spent a summer working in Singapore. It was the first time I'd ever been in Asia. And I was living in Singapore, working in Singapore. I had to do some work in Southeast Asia, and I was living in the community, right? That was effectively my day-to-day. Yet I had friends who studied abroad who spent a semester on a campus halfway around the world that was kind of like the campus they were at when they were in school, hanging around with other students from the same country that they came from. And their international exposure was kind of meaningless. And so I think there's a range, right? And there are things that you can do online actually are in many ways superior to some poor offline immersion, quote unquote, or lack of immersion type of exchanges where you're basically in the same environment that you're used to, but just in a different country. But everything else is practically the same. But there's very different types of approaches for real living immersions where you actually go and live as a resident in a location, right? Where things aren't just handed to you, but you have to go and figure out how to do shopping at the local market because you have to cook for yourself. You don't just go to a cafeteria. You have to go and figure out how to navigate, how to join a local gym, how to navigate the streets, how to find your own entertainment. That is the kind of experience that virtual cannot replace. But what you can do online is think about some of the mindsets that you get by going abroad, and then think about how you can improve upon that. So for example, the approach to a curriculum that is international by default doesn't just mean that you go and you study some context. You don't say, oh, well, I'm going to, instead of going to Italy, I'm going to study Italy, and therefore I will know more than living there. Well, you know different things, right? Some things you'll learn a little bit formally, but you won't have that context. But what you can do much more easily online than you can do in real world is the comparative nature of it. So rather than saying, I'm going to go and do Italian studies, you think about, well, what aspects of Italian studies are really interesting to me? Maybe what's interesting to me is the form of parliamentary government that happens in Italy, where governments rise and fall all the time. Well, that's kind of interesting because Japan had a period of time that was also very, very similar to that, right? And you can maybe look at that parliamentary system versus Japanese parliamentary system versus some parliamentary systems that are a little bit more stable and ask why. And what are the dynamics that make sense from that type of perspective? Now, why do you want to do that in an online versus an offline perspective? Why does online help? Is because you can also create certain types of connections online that are actually much easier than offline, especially across courses, right? Because the online environment can give you a data-mediated learning environment. And that can actually bring learning objectives together from different types of disciplines, from different types of contexts for individual students. And so depending on how you design the online experience, you can get certain benefits that you cannot get in certain offline experiences, but I don't think you can replicate the real living immersive environment that you can if you actually go and live as a resident as opposed to as a guest.
Thanks very much, Ben. We're going to begin to move into our question and answer answer session now, taking questions from the floor. So I'd like to start with the question around, which I'd very much like one of our students to focus on, and I thought maybe it would be good for Vinicius. So my experience with International Students Mobility Program has been focusing on the global north. Why is that so? And is there a way to change and explore the same program in the global south, particularly in Africa? And I thought, Vinicius, your COIL experiences might shed light on this.
Yeah, I had this third project that I'm right now with Brazil and South Africa. So I guess we already start to making these south-to-south connections, and the more we stay together, we are countries in the south, we should make things together and improve these programs in order to get more of this and development for our south countries. I guess we should focus on our universities in touch with other universities, like I am doing right now, like my university is doing. And the more projects that we have, the more it will be this kind of project and more accessible for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vinicius. I'd like to go to Mkhadi and ask you, when one travels physically, one is often one of very few people of your own cultural background being immersed into a larger grouping of a different and fairly homogeneous culture. It might be easier to create more diverse groups online that don't have such strong cultural dominance. Do you think this would impact the learning experience, and how do you think it would impact the learning experience?
I think it definitely sounds great, and it may be easier to create these groups, but I think facilitating them will continue to probably be a challenge, because it's not always about the faces who are represented, but also the voices who are able to speak up and take space even virtually. And so I do think it would definitely be better in terms of inclusion of differently abled people, as well as people who are often unable to actually access spaces in person and continually and historically have been excluded from them, even if it's because of financial reasons or, historical background reasons, or even passports in the world that we live in now, and how they sort of do end up affecting the way that we navigate the world globally. But I think that it is important for us to be conscious of how dominating whiteness can be in such spaces, for example, but even just as was spoken or asked about just in the previous question, ideologies and sort of standpoints from the global north always looking at the global south, rather than a sort of a facilitated exchange which allows all voices to sort of be equally heard. So I think that it would definitely impact the learning experience, but particularly asking facilitators to be quite sensitive to how they create groups would definitely be important, and making sure that also connections are made not only from facilitators to learners, but also laterally across learners, and actually making that happen. And it could definitely impact the learning experience in a positive way if moderated well.
Thanks, Mkhadi. Very interesting insights. I'm going to ask Andrew whether he could respond to the next question. Student mobility is often seen through the lens of the visiting student's experience of enrichment. In an online world, can we conceive sharing and transfer of expertise? So in other words, mutual co-education or tutoring of groups in the visited country?
That's an excellent question. I would say a common theme with the last few comments, starting with Ben's comments in the response, since a common thing has been intentionality. And so to that point, yes, I mean, much of, when thinking of US study abroad, for example, it is often crafted through the lens of what is the American student going to gain by being immersed in X culture, versus saying, what does reciprocity look like? How does both the student that's going, as well as the local students or local community benefit from? So I would say both in an online and offline world, intentionality is critical in ensuring that there is this mutual exchange of knowledge, of culture, so that the benefit of global engagement isn't a one-sided endeavor, but it's something that is benefiting all parties that are involved.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Thanks for that. Nkosi, I'd like to pose this question to you. Mobility is designed to bring people together, to break down barriers, to challenge comfort zones, and to facilitate interpersonal connections, as well as learning. To do this virtually, how would we enable students to connect on a level playing field? It has to be more than an online classroom experience. Connecting personally, socially, how can this be facilitated through the online experience?
So it's very interesting. Just before this, I was looking at some stats that I've collected from my research, which was looking at how 77 of the 700 students who replied to my research said that they really do miss, the resident, apart from missing academic life or academic activity in the university. They actually miss the residence life, the general campus life that they, engage with other students in. And so regarding mobility, I would say the first thing is mentorship. There's nothing as powerful as structuring not only just physical mentorship, but virtual mentorship. But of course, what I've found through research to be very difficult for organizations, universities, and many teams that are not only just in working environments, but in social gatherings, is how to structure virtual mentorship groups. And so for me, it's to say, for us to connect personally and socially, this can be facilitated through the structuring of virtual mentorships. And one of the things I'd like to share about how we will actually be able to do that is by enabling training for students. Most of our physical mentorship takes place by a student being linked with one mentor. So it's a one-on-one interaction or relationship. And what I, as a researcher, would advise for structuring virtual mentorships to enable people to connect personally and socially is by enabling a connection through training, making sure that there's a high-level management of the virtual mentorship sessions, or rather sort of like virtual mentorship groups, that it's high level, meaning that there's management to manage the non-intentional connections that may exist, because students are bound to drop out of mentorship groups virtually, like compared to physical spaces. So it will be that there will be training, but also that there will be that virtual mentorships will be organized in cohorts instead of one-to-one, because then students are bound to feel more connected and more socially knitted within the groups that will be there virtually. And then another one that I wanted to speak on is the frequency. Most of the time in physical mentorship groups that are structured, frequency is not much of a problem, because you know that you have this physical obligation that you have to meet. But sometimes when you have a virtual mentorship session, the virtual obligation is not really something that many students or groups will be attached to. So what I always advise is that the frequency that is enabled in virtual mentorship groups to enable connecting personally to people and socially be increased. So for instance, meeting 2 to 4 times virtually than you would meet 1 to 2 times physically in a month, let's say, in a physical mentorship group. So yeah, so with regards to that, I would say that perhaps maybe let's look at how we will structure virtual mentorship sessions or groups, not only just as in teams or businesses, but in universities, in the virtual academic interactions or programs. Let's actually have the virtual mentorships to enable students to connect and to really find out what students are dealing with, because I find that in my research, students are dealing with quite a lot, because perhaps mainly the focus is the virtual academic program, rather than enabling students to actually connect in a non-academic manner. I hope that answers the question sufficiently.
Thanks very much. Again, lovely insights there. Lots of things we can pick up on and do. I'd like to move to Ben now. So the question here is around, while physical exchange programs are extremely costly, there are opportunities for scholarships. Do you think that scholarships and grant foundations would pay for the virtual experience?
Well, of course. I mean, I think that again, a well-designed program will absolutely do that. So, for example, we've been working with a group called Global Citizen Year in the United States that is the leader in doing gap years for students between high school and college, and they do them in various locations around the world. Obviously, this year that program is not available. You can't do it physically, and so we've together created a virtual gap semester, effectively, and that program, which is on a sliding scale, that depending on the student's ability to pay, ranges from the list price of $7,500 all the way down to $500, and that is largely supported by the Shawn Mendes Foundation, who contributed $250,000 to enable Global Citizen Year to offer that accessibility. So I think that you can absolutely get the kind of financial support for a well-designed virtual program as much as you can, in fact, even more so than you can for a physical one, because it is just more cost effective. So that $250,000 goes much, much, much further in a virtual world than it would be in a physical one.
The next question I'd like to look at, I would like to address first to Mokgadi and then to Andrew, because it came out of what Andrew said. I'd be interested for Mokgadi to talk to it first and then see if Andrew wants to add anything more in. So this participant says, I think Andrew is right. Virtual experiences cannot be replacements. Are we making a mistake trying to think of virtual experiences as substitutes, when in fact we could treat them as supplementary or complementary experiences that enhance on the ground experiences? And Mokgadi, I thought it'd be interesting for you to think about that based on your on the ground experience, and then check whether Andrew wants to add anything in.
I think the question was very well phrased in terms of already mentioning, the alternative sort of ways of framing those experiences as complementary or supplementary, because I think that's exactly the best way in which they could operate, rather than being sort of those that would replace those former experiences. And when I do think of just the benefits of immersion, just not only from a standpoint of, riding your bicycle in Amsterdam and going for coffees or something like that after a classroom, but even just if you want to look at the very academic benefits that we are meant to eke out of the semester abroad experiences, I think that it really would be important not to let go of all of that and the benefits of all of that, even while recognizing just how inaccessible to sort of a majority or all of the people who would desire experiences like that might be. But I do think that virtual supplements would definitely be very helpful, even for students who may want to participate in, let's say, shorter programs because they may be unable to take advantage of fuller programs, or students who may want to sort of have that experience but still maintain some connection to home physically.
Thanks very much, Mokgadi. Andrew, would you like to add in?
Yeah, just kind of on the back of that, I think we can be prescriptive, and so how we use technology, if the goal is intentionality and ensuring that it enhances the experience for the students, then I think there are a variety of different things that we can leverage technology to do, both before students leave, while they're abroad, and once they come home. I think about my experiences both studying as well as working abroad, and this is not pre-technology, but it was not nearly as advanced as it is now. And there's so many ways that technology can enhance the experience. And for students, for students that just are not able to go, then yes, let's be very intentional how we leverage online programs for them to engage. I think it was mentioned earlier, a well-developed online program can be more beneficial than an in-country program that's not intentionally meant to connect students to the people, to the culture, and so on and so forth. So I guess the easy way of saying is like technology is not, there's no workaround to intentionality, online or offline. And so how we use technology, the more intentional we are with it, the greater the impact it will have, both on a student who is going, as well as the local community.
Thanks very much, Andrew. The next question I have, I would like to have both Ben first and then Vinicius respond to it, because of your very different experiences in virtual environments. So how would a COIL or virtual exchange contribute to developing graduate attributes in UCT students and preparing them for an internationalized or globalized world? Can you still get that through an online experience?
Oh,
Ben?
I would say absolutely. So we run a master's program as an example, which is 100% virtual. There's no residential component whatsoever. It's actually meant for working professionals. And so it's done part-time and it's done virtually. And in any given class, and our master's classes are very, very small, kind of 9 to 12 students at a time, you usually have half a dozen or more countries represented among that cohort. And so the nature of the interaction, by the way, when they first meet, which is during graduation, they behave as if they've been friends their entire lives. And so if you actually create an environment that is extremely deep and immersive during the class itself, you establish some of those deep connections, and the curriculum is designed to actually provide universal cognitive tools and different layers of thinking that can be applied anywhere, and is specifically done in such a way that it uses cross-cultural, cross-contextual examples in order to get students to be able to apply generically. So you can create these types of programs that actually give students a more rigorous academic background in the tools that they can apply in cultural settings. And of course, you do want students to get at some point soon thereafter, ideally during, the ability to apply it on the ground. But you can certainly prepare students for that immersion in a thoughtful and, as Andrew said, intentional way, rather than just rely on them getting it in the environment where they're kind of already immersed in various things and may not have the solid frameworks coming in.
Thanks, Ben. Vinicius, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, like I said on my first answer, I like to think in this COIL project as an introduction to physical contact, maybe. I feel a lot more comfortable to travel after my first COIL project, even through because of the language barrier that was broke, or because the first contact with someone who has a difference of thinking, difference in culture, etc. So I like to think in COIL project just as an introduction. I feel like if a student needs to travel, or the opportunity to travel to other countries shows up, and if he had the virtual experience first, he will make things a lot of easier to this physical travel. Back to you.
Thanks very much. So, Aten Kosi, we'll come to you again now. Question placed by the floor: what are the pedagogic benefits of virtual exchange? Is the primary benefit personal growth, or is it worth pursuing on educational grounds?
Thank you once more, Professor Harrison, for that question. Without a doubt, I think for me it's definitely worth pursuing on a pedagogical or academic ground. And what I really think about it, it's a comment that was made in one of the videos that we watched. It is that, and this is how I think of it. I think that knowledge really doesn't care about a lot of things. Knowledge really cares if it is known. So the important thing is to know something. And so what really the challenge is when we think about it academically is the question of, once now this knowledge is availed, what are other things that actually stand in the way of students, organizations, in order for them not to actually use or be capacitated with the knowledge that they receive. So when I think about it, I think about how, I think an example that quickly comes to mind, forgive me, the example that quickly comes to mind for me is that of an elephant that is tied into a pole from a very young age. That elephant lacks the knowledge that it is powerful, it is majestic, and it really can shake itself off from the pole and be free, right? And it's a matter of lacking the knowledge. And then once you have that knowledge, you actually use it, because then once you have knowledge, you can change your perspective. And I think someone mentioned it here. It's, for me, the concern that I have particularly with online learning is the power that it brings for me to have any perspective in the world, because that's what we are offered now. We are offered an opportunity to have a perspective from Spain. We are offered an opportunity to have a perspective from Mozambique, from Australia, from the US, in terms of how do they do things. The amount of courses that are offered virtually now, and mostly for free via MIT and other prestigious universities, is a gift of knowledge that once we actually acquire it on a pedagogical ground, on an academic ground, once we capture that knowledge and we use it, it changes perspective. And for me, perspective, just like that elephant, perspective is life and perspective is freedom. So what we really now are exposed to is there is the gift of knowledge and the experience that is virtual, that is offered from anywhere in the world, right, through the academic exchange. But the beauty about it now is, now that this knowledge, this experience that has been lacking through physical mobility, now that it is availed to us, the question that I've been personally asking, in my own endeavors, is what are then the things, the low-hanging fruits, the things that really stop us from having to move forward, and from having to actually use the knowledge that is now available. And just to end off my point, this is really what I'd like to point out regarding the academic exchange. We are having, through this pandemic, as higher education institutions, we are having an opportunity that will probably not be available to us for many years to come. And it is an opportunity, I called it here, an opportunity to solve complex global challenges that demand a collaborative approach. And the divide currently that is there within higher education institutions is that we all want to be the best in this and in this. But now the challenge, because the student is at the center, we need to serve the student, make sure the student gets the knowledge. The challenge is solving these complex problems requires all higher institutions, higher education institutions, to come together in a social manner, in an academic or pedagogical manner. It's now time to collaborate in new ventures so that we can solve the problem, which is the elephant in the room, that there are low-hanging fruits regarding bringing virtual experiences or allowing access to students to having this knowledge, or rather using this knowledge to capacitate themselves. And you'll find that most of these challenges are the environments that learners are coming in. And what again, just to tie everything off, what again is happening is that the pandemic that we are currently facing, that allows us to go virtually to offering these academic opportunities or academic knowledge to students, what it's really revealing is like what I want to call the pandemic of society, the iniquities that currently exist that really stop or marginalize students from having access to this knowledge, or having access to resources that will allow them to be capacitated with the knowledge that is provided. So it really then doesn't matter whether you avail this knowledge, but what it matters is understanding what stands in the gap between the student grabbing the knowledge and using that knowledge to capacitate themselves, capacitate others, and capacitate others who are going to be in the future, not limited only just to the present. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and what a lovely one to end on. I'd like to thank the audience for the fantastic questions that you've said. I could carry on asking questions for a good long while now, but it is now time for the VC to return to the VC.
Thank you very much, Sue. What a wonderful evening. I mean, we have learned tonight about some things we feel may not get so easily done, or we may not get easily from online experience. And our panelists have talked much about them. We can't get immersion, we can't get sharing a meal with people that we've just met at the conference, or people that we are meeting on our study abroad experience. We can't have a hug. We can't we can't be pushed out of our comfort zones if we're working virtually. And there's also an argument that has been made that we can't build networks. But my view is that some of these things actually can be done virtually. I mean, I think it is still possible to build networks virtually. Some networks we can build virtually. And I'm reminded of networks that I've been able to build virtually. I mean, some of you who are following me online would know about the virtual communities that I have, the hashtag #3am squad. It's like such a strong community that you see how they interact. I've never met many of them, they've never met, but it's a community of postgraduate students who are supporting one another, sharing resources, giving each other advice. And the sessions that I run on every Sunday, they are managed by a team of people that I've never met. They coordinate the questions, they send them to me. We meet every Saturday to go through the work that we're doing together. And it's interesting how strong the bond is, as if we've met before, even though we've never met. So I just want to say, perhaps part of what the pandemic is forcing us to do is to sort of get out of the boundaries that we work in. Definitely, we can't get a hug. Definitely, we can't share a meal, and we would do that if it were face-to-face. So there's other things, other experiences that we use to get in face-to-face that I still think we can get online. We have learned tonight about some aspects where the online experience might have the edge, such as inclusion, avoiding cultural dominance, and connecting across courses. We do want everyone to participate in study abroad, and online gives us that opportunity. But we've also discussed tonight, but perhaps what we've discussed tonight is not an either or. It's the fact that we can have both. For instance, most universities across the world have gone almost completely online for teaching and learning during the pandemic. And the big question is, what does the future look like? Will we go back to the old normal as if online doesn't exist? I don't think so. My view is that the future is one where blended learning will be the norm. And perhaps we should be looking at this for international experience too. We should say, what does a blended approach to international education look like, or international experience, student experience look like? And perhaps in doing that, it will give us an opportunity to push the boundaries and make this experience available to those who may not afford to go overseas. Andrew suggested that they could be complementary, of course, and I'm sure there are many entities like Andrew's which are thinking about that. The virtual could also lead to the physical. By the way, we can start the virtual, as Andrew said, and then it can lead to the physical, or vice versa. It can start physical and go to virtual. Traveling abroad is a huge step for many students. I mean, for some of our students, and I know it was the same for me when I went to vets. For many of our students who come from marginalized populations, just coming to vets, to UCT is a challenge, and is already pushing them out of their comfort zone. If you come from a marginalized background, it's like going to a big city and a big university, which is diverse, and people who you've never interacted with can be a challenge, right? So to take on the challenge of going to another country altogether can feel overwhelming. And so starting with the virtual can be a good way to get comfortable even before a student thinks, or to make sure that a student is not even scared to take the opportunity to go overseas. We can start with the virtual, and then they can get enticed, but not just enticed, they can get comfortable with interacting with people from other cultures. In a way that Vicinius described, this can be a way of getting other students involved, and it can lead to future physical travel for those students who might not even have thought it's a possibility for them. I want to thank all of our panelists for the insights that you've shared with us. Thank you so much for the work that you do, because by sharing with us tonight, you've let us in, you've given us a gaze and a closer interaction with the work that you do and the thinking that you are engaged in, because you are already, Andrew, Ben, you are involved in this work. So it helps us to engage with you because it helps us think. And to Vicinius, Mashadi, Atenkosi, I hope I mentioned everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us your insights as well from your perspective. They help us as we think forward. Sue, thank you so much for moderating the session. I really appreciate working with you and you doing this work and leading it as we look into the future. Tonight, of course, we focused on undergraduate mobility. Our next session will be on the 24th of August, and it will focus on the postgraduate international experience. If it was in our ability, we would make sure that all of our students have international experience. We're engaging in these conversations to see other possibilities of ensuring more of our students have international experience, and also other students overseas, how can they get their international experience with us at UCT, either virtually or physically. We'll be focusing on postgraduate international experience, and I hope you can join us. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, or this morning, or this afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you, and see you on the 24th of August.